There's a line doing the rounds, the sort that begins as a knowing whisper and ends up, by tea time, sounding like established truth. France has had enough of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Not France in the grand constitutional sense, obviously. No one is expecting Emmanuel Macron to clear this diary for a press conference titled Non merci, madame. But France in that familiar shorthand we all use when we mean a tight knot of gatekeepers, fashion houses, event organizers, brand fixers, and the little ecosystem of advisors who can make an invitation appear or disappear. The claim, as it's being passed around by people who insist they've heard it from people who would know, is that the Paris scene has cooled, not with a public snub, not with a dramatic ban, but with something far more effective: polite doors quietly closed. Fewer open calls, fewer "we'd love to see you." Less of that continental indulgence where a famous face is waved through because, well, it's easier than a scene. Instead, the story goes, there's a new firmness, less flexibility, less appetite for last-minute appearances that feel, to the Parisians, like someone turning up to your dinner party with a film crew and a personal storyline. Now, it's worth pausing because this is where the modern celebrity rumor mill does its most skillful work. It takes a series of small, banal realities, the admin of security, the churn of PR, the politics of seating plans, and turns them into a narrative of exile. Sometimes that narrative is nonsense. Sometimes it's a half-truth dressed up like a thriller. And sometimes it's something else entirely, a reflection of how institutions behave when they don't want to fight, but they do want to be left alone. Paris fashion, unlike the British court system, doesn't publish reasons. It doesn't issue formal judgments. It simply behaves as though you're no longer part of the arrangement. One season you're photographed, the next you're not. One year you're in the mix, the next you are, somehow, always elsewhere. That's how hierarchies survive, not by shouting, but by editing you out. Those pushing this particular story describe a frustration that has allegedly been building for a while. The tone, they say, is less moral outrage and more weary irritation, like a committee chair who's realized a witness has come to perform rather than answer questions. Some in the Paris fashion world reportedly view Meghan as someone who treats fashion as a stage rather than a craft. That's the accusation, anyway, that she drifts in, borrows the aura, creates a moment, and leaves everyone else dealing with the consequences. If you've ever watched how a Westminster lobby rumor takes shape, you'll recognize the pattern. First, it's "people are saying." Then it becomes "it's understood." Then, within a week, it's "sources close to," and suddenly the whole thing has the weight of a parliamentary convention. Paris is different in culture, but identical in instinct. Status matters. Access is currency. And those who run the show don't like feeling used. The sharper versions of the gossip, the ones delivered with a little too much relish, deploy the harsh label, culture vulture. It's a nasty phrase, not least because it pretends cultures are pristine museums rather than messy, living things that borrow from each other every day. But as an insult, it does a particular job. It suggests someone is taking without giving, harvesting proximity for personal gain. Whether that's fair is another matter. In truth, fashion is full of people taking without giving. Half the industry is built on it. But there's a difference between an insider playing the game and an outsider who is perceived, rightly or wrongly, as not respecting the rules. And the rules in Paris are unspoken but rigid. Invitations are not just invitations, they are signals. They say, you belong here, you're part of this, you understand the language. That's why people care so much about the front row. It's not because chairs are comfortable, it's because the seating plan is a map of the food chain.
Some insiders claim that Meghan's appearances, or the expectation of them, became an irritant because they pulled focus from the work. Collections are meant to be the headline. Designers want the conversation to be about silhouette and cut, not about a celebrity's personal narrative. When a show becomes a backdrop for somebody else's drama, the people who paid for it start to feel like extras in their own production. And in Paris, nobody likes being an extra. The more conspiratorial strand of the story goes further. It suggests that pressure has been applied behind the scenes to stop last-minute access, that boundaries are being enforced more strictly, that the city's machinery has been encouraged to be less accommodating. You will notice, of course, how carefully this is phrased, even by those who spread it. No one says there's a ban. No one produces a letter. No one points to a policy. It's all implication. That's not proof of anything. It's just how these networks operate. If something happens quietly, it can be denied loudly. And here is the thing people sometimes miss. You don't need a ban to be frozen out. You just need a lack of enthusiasm, a missing callback, an unanswered email, a diary that is suddenly unworkable. If you've ever tried to get a straight answer out of a government department, you'll know silence is often the most decisive response. Why does any of this matter to a British political audience, beyond the obvious entertainment value and the irresistible temptation of a royal-adjacent soap opera? Because the Sussex story has long been a proxy battle in our own culture wars. In Westminster, it lands as shorthand. For some, a morality tale about disloyalty and grievance. For others, a case study in the cruelty of establishment power. MPs don't discuss hemlines, but they do discuss symbolism. The monarchy, after all, is not just a family. It's part of Britain's soft power machinery. When the royal brand leaks into international fashion politics, it becomes, like it or not, a conversation about Britain's image abroad. Some MPs insist off the record that they're tired of the whole saga, yet you'll still catch them watching the clips on their phones between votes, the way people swear they've quit reality TV but somehow know exactly who's fallen out with whom this week. There's a certain guilty pleasure in it. Politics is exhausting. Celebrity drama is a holiday for the brain. Still, the broader point stands. When an internationally famous British-linked figure is said to be losing access in Paris, it nudges the conversation about what status now means in the post-palace, post-Brexit, post-everything era. And then there's the Middle East angle, the part of the rumor package that always arrives with a knowing tone, as if geopolitics is a dinner party and reputations are place cards. The chatter here claims that cities like Dubai, which thrive on controlled glamour, are wary. The reasoning, as presented by those who repeat it, is simple: risk report. The Gulf, they say, likes predictability. It likes stability. It likes partners who don't bring drama in their suitcase. Again, this is largely talk. It's sources familiar with the region. It's people close to decision-making. It's the sort of language that can mean anything from a senior advisor said it to someone saw a WhatsApp message. But the structure of the claim is plausible in the abstract. Gulf states are meticulous about image management. They do not invite unnecessary turbulence. They do not take a punt, as a British agent might say, on someone who could become tomorrow's headline for all the wrong reasons. One strand of online speculation drifts into more serious territory, muttering about finances, governance, scrutiny, and specifically the Sussex's charity foundation, Archwell. It's important to say this clearly. Speculation is not evidence. A rumor of scrutiny is not the same as scrutiny. People on the internet can talk of IRS interest the way they talk of alien landings, with great confidence and absolutely no paperwork. But the mere existence of those whispers can be enough to make cautious partners pause. Institutions do not need a conviction. They need a reason to avoid a headache. That is the unspoken truth the well-connected types will admit over a drink. Reputation is often managed on fear, not facts. In the corporate world, they call it risk assessment. In Westminster, it's simpler. Nobody wants to be the next person dragged into a row they didn't start. If you've ever watched a minister suddenly lose signal when a controversial policy question is asked, you've seen the same instinct at work. Saudi Arabia is folded into this narrative too, the suggestion that there is no enthusiasm there for Meghan, no invitations, no warm overtures, no interest in using her profile. Perhaps that's true. Perhaps it's simply that Saudi has other priorities and doesn't need the complication. The rumor mill, as ever, prefers drama. It imagines a deliberate frost. Reality is often duller. Sometimes the door isn't slammed, it simply isn't opened because nobody bothered to look up.
Put Paris and the Gulf stories together, and you get the bigger theme: institutional withdrawal. Not a smear campaign, not a conspiracy, but a slow retreat by the sorts of organizations that once found the Sussex brand intriguing. If you believe the chatter, it's happening across sectors: fashion, entertainment, international events. The phrase you hear, in various polite disguises, is that she's difficult. Not in the sense of demanding excellence, which is often forgiven, but difficult in the sense of bringing complications that outlast the photos. And Hollywood, we're told, is watching carefully. Hollywood executives are not moral philosophers, they're merchants. They're famously allergic to chaos that they can't control. The industry will tolerate scandal if it sells and if it is contained. It will not tolerate scandal if it spills into boardrooms and makes people feel vulnerable. This is why certain celebrities bounce back from almost anything, while others find themselves suddenly hard to schedule. The Sussex story has, over time, developed that ominous echo: meetings that never quite happen, projects that drift, deals that sound exciting and then go quiet. That doesn't prove a blacklist, it proves something more mundane. Enthusiasm changes, the mood changes, and in a town that runs on momentum, a loss of momentum is death by 1,000 let's circle back. At this point, someone always asks the obvious question: is it Meghan herself that's the issue, or is it the broader narrative attached to her? Because the two are now inseparable. Meghan doesn't just arrive as Meghan, she arrives with an entire ecosystem of expectation. Every outfit is dissected, every appearance is treated as a statement, every interaction becomes a Rorschach test for whatever people already believe about her. Even if she walked into a Paris salon and said nothing, half the internet would still accuse her of saying it in the wrong tone. There is, too, the Prince Harry factor, the subplot that makes the whole thing feel less like celebrity chatter and more like a genuine political soap opera with real consequences. The text you've provided leans heavily on the idea that Harry has been absent, appearing solo more often, and imposing stricter terms on interviews. That may be a fair reading of public patterns, or it may be an overinterpretation fueled by wishful thinking from people who want to split. The truth is that couples' public schedules shift for many reasons: security, strategy, childcare, plain old logistics. But in politics, as in monarchy, perception becomes reality if it lasts long enough. The rumor mill suggests, and rumor is the right word, that Harry is trying to carve out distance, not necessarily from his wife personally, but from the controversies that swirl around her. That's a subtle difference that gets lost online, where nuance goes to die. Some whisper that he is in survival mode, trying to preserve what remains of his own credibility with institutions that once mattered to him: charities, veterans networks, perhaps even a faint hope of being less toxic in Britain. Is that true? It is impossible to say without stepping into pure invention, and we won't do that. But the idea resonates because it fits a recognizable pattern: the partner who begins to negotiate with the world again, while the other continues to treat rejection as persecution. These are not just marital dynamics, they are brand dynamics, and the Sussex brand has always been a double act, a shared narrative sold with absolute confidence. If that shared narrative begins to wobble, the world notices. Attempts to rehabilitate Harry in the UK
are frequently discussed as though they are a formal process, like rejoining the party whip. In reality, it's more like trying to walk back into a pub after you've stood on a table and insulted everyone's family. You might be allowed in, but you'll feel the room. And according to those who claim insight into palace thinking, the room is not warm. Here, Westminster is a useful lens. People who have left a party in a blaze of fury sometimes imagine they can return if they frame it as a misunderstanding. But institutions have long memories. They may smile, because politeness is an art form, but they do not forget. When you've aired grievances publicly, the cost of re-entry is usually silence, humility, and time. Those are not always compatible with modern celebrity politics, which thrives on constant content. What's striking, if you step back from the personalities, is how consistent the alleged language has become across different worlds. Fashion people, we're told, say she doesn't get the culture. Gulf gatekeepers are said to see volatility. Hollywood types reportedly worry about collateral damage. Commentators mother about legal scrutiny. Different sectors, similar conclusion. Too much complication for not enough payoff. Now, there is a danger here, the danger of treating the current mood as destiny. We've seen public figures pronounced finished, only to reinvent themselves a year later. We've seen scandals declared fatal that turned out to be nothing. And we've also seen the opposite, people who dismissed warning signs and then acted shocked when the doors really did close. So what is the real story underneath all this gossip? It might be as simple as this. The Sussexes are discovering that institutions do not argue back. They do not write angry threads. They do not go on podcasts to defend themselves. They just stop taking your calls. And in a world where access is everything, silence is not just an absence of noise, it is a decision. There's an irony, too, that would make even the most cynical Westminster operators smirk into their coffee. For years, the Sussex brand has leaned on the idea of exclusion, being shut out, being mistreated, being denied. That narrative has been powerful, not least because it plugs into wider debates about privilege, press cruelty, and the monarchy's stubborn old habits. But if exclusion becomes operational rather than rhetorical, if it shows up as fewer invitations, fewer meetings, fewer platforms, then it stops being a story you can sell and becomes a practical problem you have to live with. And this is where the wry humor creeps in, because politics is full of people who don't realize the difference between attention and influence until it's too late. Westminster is crawling with minor figures who are very famous on Twitter and utterly irrelevant in a committee room. They mistake noise for power. They assume because people are watching, people are listening. The Sussex saga, at its hardest edge, is about that same confusion. Visibility is not the same as welcome. Headlines are not the same as allies, and fame on its own does not buy you membership of closed systems that are obsessed with control. So will Paris truly ice out Meghan? Will the Gulf truly close ranks? Is Hollywood truly done with her? Perhaps, perhaps not. The safer, more honest answer is that we're watching a reputational negotiation play out in real time, filtered through gossip, and amplified by an internet that treats every silence as a conspiracy. But here's the political truth that the Westminster crowd would recognize instantly. When you pick fights with institutions, you may win the argument in public, but you often lose the room in private. And rooms, not hashtags, are where power lives. Which brings us to the final uncomfortable question, the one nobody asks out loud because it sounds too bleak for a YouTube rant. What happens when the world stops reacting altogether? Criticism can be spun, outrage can be monetized, even hatred can be turned into engagement. Silence is harder. Silence means the drama no longer matters to the people who run the doors. In British politics, careers usually don't end with a bang. They end with fewer calls from the lobby, fewer texts from colleagues, and that slow realization that you're no longer in the group chat. If the Sussex story is drifting in that direction, if this really is institutional withdrawal rather than a temporary storm, then the most revealing moment won't be a headline. It'll be the day the headlines stop coming and everyone in the room quietly moves on.